Dear listeners of the Public Health Insight Podcast, my name is Will, and before we begin this week's episode, we just wanted to share a new partnership between PHI and the Canadian Global Health Students and Young Professionals Summit. The 7th Annual Global Health Student and Young Professionals Summit will be taking place virtually this October 17th, and this event will be totally free of charge for all participants. If you're interested in learning more about this event, please check out the link in this description below. Thank you so much, and enjoy the episode.
Public health is a population-based field of science focused on preventing disease and promoting health. Every week, we will be engaging in interactive discussions and analyses of the latest public health issues affecting you and your communities all around the world. This is the Public Health Insight Podcast.
Before we move on, it is important to note that the views expressed in this podcast are our own and do not represent any of the organizations we work for or are affiliated with.
Education is a key social determinant of health and has the power to improve health outcomes for populations. In the previous episode, we spoke about health disparities that exist between populations despite having similar levels of educational attainment with our guest Nicole Vick, adjunct professor, TEDx speaker, and Amazon best-selling author of Pushing Through, Finding the Light in Every Lesson. She remains with us in this episode to examine the barriers to education, the prevalence of institutional racism in our academic institutions, social exclusion, and how these factors interact to impact the health of already marginalized communities. This is where we left off in our conversation.
So I just wanted to switch it up a bit and talk about, if we look at it from the other perspective. So we talk about how education influences population's ability to achieve, positive health, if you will. What about barriers to education? So when we look at it the other way, what are some things that influences someone's or a population's ability to kind of achieve the education that they need? So one of the examples I was seeing is, maybe you live in an environment or a neighborhood where it's heavily polluted, and your child has asthma and they have to miss a lot of classes every day, and they kind of fall behind in school because of the health problems caused by their environment. And then that kind of affects the prospects in education. So that's just one example I could come up with.
There are two things that come to mind for me that seem to impact students in the communities that, I'm familiar with. One of them is food access. If you're hungry, you're not paying attention. You can't. You're hungry. And the other one is the exposure to violence and the trauma that occurs.
Yes.
And, there have been a couple of articles I had read over the years. I remember one article. I wish I could remember the name of the program that was going on in one of the school districts around trying to help children work through the trauma. But in this particular article, the little boy, his mother had just had like a miscarriage, or the baby died. The mom was pregnant and baby passed. And so mom was depressed. She has going through her feelings and trying to deal with everything. And so the little boy was also having a hard time because he didn't quite understand what was going on. And mom, of course, understandably so, wasn't in the right headspace to be able to really work with her son's feelings because she's trying to process her own. And so the teacher was able to figure out, hey, something's not right. He's acting differently, maybe withdrawn, maybe he was a little bit more hostile, combative, whatever it was. There was a program, art therapy program in the school that was able to help him work through what was going on. And I think they were also able to support the mom and help her get the help that she needed. So, the impact of trauma, violence, loss, grief can also really have a huge impact on children. We have seen studies that show that Black children, especially Black boys, are often kind of filtered into special education classes because they're hostile, they're angry, they're fighting, and it's like, what can we look and see what's going on at home or in the neighborhood that really may be impacting this child's behavior. We're quick to kind of put them in a special ed class, put them or kick them out or expel them without really thinking about what's going on. So definitely violence and trauma and that exposure to violence, and then literally just not having food. And not being able to eat and know where your next meal is coming from can have huge impacts on a child's ability to learn.
Right. And I've seen even, a while back, there was a community, I'm sure there's several of them all over, including the United States, where a principal kind of set up an initiative to get kids transported from their homes to the school because he found out that his school was having a lot of absenteeism because there was a lot of violence and most of his kids had to walk to school, right? So then you have parents having to make the decision between, their child not getting, assaulted or killed versus them getting education. Obviously, if you're a parent, you're going to choose for your child to kind of be safe. So it just shows also that even just violence in communities, like you said, can serve as a barrier for children getting, sustained education.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So exactly. So we've spoken extensively about how, the importance between education and health and how people who tend to be more educated tend to have more positive outcomes, although there are some exceptions. But how easy is it to get an education? We've talked about violence being a barrier, but what about racial disparities specifically? And how do those impact the access to education and the quality of education someone receives while they're in the higher education?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, so we're talking about college now, undergrad, grad school, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's talk.
I heard you take a breath, so I just took some. Let's go.
So I'll talk a little bit about my experience, which was so long ago, over 20 years ago. It's okay. But I think it will actually make a lot of sense because I'm starting to see now a lot of colleges and universities sort of kind of come to terms with their own historical past and some of the things that they've done to, either on purpose or on accident, sort of create this difference in experience for Black students and other students of color and everyone else. So I walked onto the campus of the University of Southern California as a freshman back in 1996. I used to live probably 5 minutes away from campus my entire life. I grew up around USC. We went grocery shopping across the street from USC. So USC was very close, but it was yet far away. It felt far, unattainable, because I didn't ever see anybody that looked like me on that campus, as close as I was to it in my entire life growing up. Somehow, and I always say somehow, but no, the reality is I did work hard, applied like everybody else. I got into school, right? Yay. But I felt out of place. I felt unprepared. I felt like this school is not built for me. It is not intended for me. I know the school was built in like 1880 or something like that. And back then, were they thinking about this Black girl from South Central walking on in this campus? No. So the school, by its nature, was not intended for someone like me. Add to that, I was pregnant. I was a teen mom, trying to navigate college. And so it was really hard. There were things like the Black Student Union and things and they offered support. But you walk through campus, the people, the names on the buildings and the photos and statues. No, they're not Black folks. Not saying they should be, but it just didn't feel like there was diversity. And so
you didn't identify with the place as much.
Right. And so fast forward 20 years later, starting to see the university. And again, I'm picking on USC because that's my experience. And I'm sure others can speak to their experiences. 20 years later, fast forward, they're talking about, we might want to rename this one particular building because he was a former president of the university, but he was a supporter of eugenics. What? Why, why are we just now talking about this in 2020? It's almost like Black Lives Matter and all of the things that we have to do. We have to act up and act out collectively in general before people start to think about changing things. Oh, let's change the name of the Washington Redskins. How long have people been asking for that kind of stuff? Right? So it was just ironic again in 2020. I've been out of school since the year 2000 and felt out of place back then. And now, maybe we should think about how we treat our students of color and how to make sure that our campus is more diverse. You think so? Like why now? Why not 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And I think it really does have an impact on the quality of the person's experience on campus, whether they get out on time or at all. As far as graduating, I was told to take a leave of absence when I said I needed help. I need help. I'm pregnant. What do I do? Well, maybe you should just, take a leave of absence. Why? Why are you trying to tell me to, if I take a leave of absence, what is the likelihood that I'll come back and graduate?
Right.
Very low.
Right.
So why aren't you helping me and helping me find resources instead of just telling me to take a leave of absence?
Well, I'm even thinking about the leave of absence when, if you take that, I'm guessing if you're out for a year or two, they might make you even redo a lot of the courses that you already done. So it's not very, it doesn't put you in a position where you can come back and feel like you won't be excluded. I'm glad you kind of got into this as well, because in the climate we're in now, everyone is talking about police brutality and police are bad and this and that, and I'm just like, whoa, wait a minute, what about healthcare? What about education? What about all the other institutions that are set up with the cards stacked against people of racial and ethnic minorities? It's not, and yes, on one hand, we want to kind of call out these things, but we're all about business and action right now. We're not about just simply shining a light and just moving on, like you said.
Absolutely.
You have to kind of put measures in place to make disadvantaged students in the context of higher education feel included.
Absolutely. Right? And really quickly, I can remember undergrad, I had one Black professor. One.
Can we talk about that really quickly too?
Oh yes, let's talk about it.
Do you guys remember when you had your first Black or person of color as a professor? Or have you ever had a professor that was Black or that was racialized? Like for me, it was in my last year of undergrad. Like even through elementary, did not have a single racialized person as a teacher. So Nicole, you're saying for you that was an undergrad?
Yeah. So in elementary school, all my teachers were Black. The principal was Black. Everybody Black. Okay. And I went to a private school. A parochial school is actually the more correct term. Junior high school, nice mixture, right, of Black and others. Got to college, got to USC. I can remember one. And the wonderful thing is I actually still talk to her today. She actually lives down the street. Found out. I said, hey, I think that's Dr. Lewis. Walking her dog. I'm like, awesome. Wait a minute. Graduate school, zero. Zero Black teachers. So, to your point, Linda, really important to me that there is that diversity on these college campuses. And I talk to my undergrad students, and when we have our little section on education as a public health issue, I also ask them that very same question. And there's always at least 2 or 3 that say, Nicole, you are my first Black professor or Black teacher, period. And I'm like, are you serious? And that's why I feel like it's my responsibility to give the Black girl magic version of public health and weave in my work experience, which is amazing, but also my lived experience as a teen mom, for example. Like, hey, that happens in urban communities. And I'm still here. She's 23 years old, but she was born 8 weeks early, and we could be talking about her as an infant mortality statistic, which would not be uncommon. I try to make sure I weave all that in because, again, a lot of our students don't have that perspective. They have not interacted with a Black person at that extent ever. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm glad I'm here to give that to you because you're going to get it, the full-fledged experience from me. But yeah, that's a huge question. And you will be amazed at the differences in response you get when you start to ask random people in your life, when did you have your first Black teacher? You'll be amazed.
Something that came to my mind regarding race and higher education, not only in terms of completion of higher education, but even just, I guess, the process to even get into university or college or whatever. I feel like that just the whole application process, there's so much inequity in that system that, sometimes you have universities, it's almost like, they're filling a quota of minorities but then they don't do anything to change the actual system. They make it so that it's benefiting those who are privileged, those who have, who do come from affluent families, who are able to, meet those oftentimes the extracurriculars, or even, in high school or earlier, they've had the resources to get tutoring or whatever. I just find that obviously, the quota, it's a good first step to recognize that there is a lack of visible minorities, but I find that it is very much kind of a blanket, like a Band-Aid solution. It's like, oh, here, we're noticing that there aren't enough, students of color, so we'll make sure we enroll X amount each year. But instead of doing that, it's really important to start considering, like, what is it about the system that made it so that you have to end up going to that solution? Like, why aren't there just students of color who are able to get in through regular channels? It's something that I'm kind of struggling, and also that frustrates me. I think it's oftentimes even just in not only in applying to undergrad, but you see just the statistics in applying to graduate school or professional school, and just
and I think it even goes back to high school. There was a fight. There was an organization here called Community Coalition some years ago. They were fighting just for the school district. Like, hello, can you offer? There's a certain set of classes. I forgot what the requirement is, but in high school, that kind of gives you or preps you for our state university system. And there, I guess in South LA, some of the schools didn't even have that. So it's like, how can they even get to apply or figure out how to get in if they can't even get their correct high school classes? And so it is like, we can't even get or even start to talk about the college acceptance part when we aren't even setting them up in the first place to even be able to meet the qualifications or the minimum requirements to even apply. So it really is. I think there needs to be more conversation between some of the our school districts, especially in these high schools and these universities and colleges, and I think that would be really helpful, so that these students don't end up being excited about potentially going to school and trying to apply and ultimately being let down and not being able to kind of make it through. So, I don't know what the answer is. I just know even for me, by the time I got to USC, I applied to USC as a biomedical engineer. And to this day, I can't even tell you what a biomedical engineer is. It sounded good. I checked the box. I don't know. Right. Changed my major 5 trillion times. My parents didn't know what to tell me. They were just glad I got in. And I'm like, but I don't understand. So it's trying to get in. Once you get in, how do we make sure that they feel or sort of have this safety net under them, to make sure that they finish? It's a lot. It's a lot to think about, and a lot to really try to fix from both sides, the school districts, undergrad, the secondary, and then the college. It's really, really hard.
Yeah, I'm glad that you also mentioned even before higher education is even in question. So in Canada, specifically Ontario, one of the provinces, they actually recently, the Ontario government ended the practice of streaming, which basically is kind of what you talked about, where high school students, even from grade 9, they choose whether to go into the academic stream or the applied stream. And based on that decision early on, it really dictates your prospects of maybe going to the university, colleges, or in the trades, right? So it really limits their, like we talked about early on, it limits their opportunities and all the knowledge and all the health outcomes that they could reap from pursuing education in that sense, especially if they're limited by some institutional policies early on.
What if they change their mind? What if they decide they don't want to do trades anymore? Like, what?
Okay, where I am in Alberta, we still have streaming. And what makes it even more harmful, although maybe unintentional, who knows, is that students who are in ESL or English as a second language, they're encouraged to take the applied stream. Right. And if you look at who's predominantly in ESL programs, it's racialized people of color. And so it just, it creates that gap from the beginning. And you're not even aware it's happening. Let's say, you don't have a parent or someone to advocate for you, to, tell your school advisor, no, my child is going to take the academic stream, regardless if you feel they can't, So it's like, how do you win if you don't have someone to advocate? Yeah.
By the time you get to applying for university, you realize, all my courses don't apply. I either got to go back and retake the courses, and then you get I guess slapped, further
Right.
and further. It's just
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that might actually have something to do with, there were some stats about Black and Latinx students being more likely to attend underfunded post-secondary institutions. And these, I know it's different in Canada and in the States. You have the 2-year colleges and the 4-year colleges. And, Black and brown students overwhelmingly attend these 2-year colleges, which tend to receive less state funding and present less opportunities for the students that attend them. And then, white people disproportionately attend the 4-year colleges. And as a result, those colleges get more funding and they get better opportunities when they leave school. So that perpetuates that disparity even when, as we talked about, yes, education is great, but then the playing field still isn't level once you get in it and once you get out of it.
Right. And then even if you bring into play the for-profit schools, which typically have higher tuition rates, they charge more. And then, there was a big issue some years ago. Some of these for-profit schools, they got into a lot of trouble because it's like you're charging a lot of money, but then these degrees are not useful. People are not able to get a job or the jobs that they thought they were going to be able to get. They can't pay the loans back. So now you got all these schools that are defaulting on, like these loans were like horrible. The default rate was so bad that there was a lot of crackdown on how they were providing this education. And to be perfectly honest, I taught at a couple of for-profit schools, and they do provide an opportunity for students that can't quit to go back to school full time. They have to work, they have to take classes online because they're still working, they're taking care of their families. So they provide a wonderful resource. But again, hey, when I leave here, if I want to transfer to another school or I want to get a graduate degree, is this degree recognized? Does this thing hold any value? And a lot of people were finding out after the fact, like, nobody cares about this diploma. I can't do anything with it. So I think that's the other side of again, that disproportionate or that disparity that we see, because they charge a lot and people were seriously defaulting and getting saddled with a lot of debt.
Yeah. And I want to we're going to go over to the recommendation side of things in the article and envisioning higher education as anti-racist. And one of the I wasn't going to talk about it so soon, but it's been on my mind since you mentioned, the transition from high school to higher education. And one of the recommendations in the article was to eliminate standardized test scores in college admissions. And I would love to hear what you have to say about things like the SAT and stuff like that. Because we don't have that system here in Canada.
See? That's great. I might have to come up there with y'all. I think it's something worth examining. I don't know if we should eliminate it entirely. I'm not, I don't have enough information about that. But what I will say is I do know that there is some implicit bias, some little bit of racial issues going on with the SAT. Like, is it unbiased? I don't think it is. And so that may be something worth thinking about, eliminating it entirely. And again, just relying on students' grades, their extracurricular activities, their personal statement, in order to determine if they would be a good fit for a school or not. I think that's something to be said about maybe letting go of that, because we know those types of tests, even the test that they take in high school, there's another one, I think in California, you have to take I don't know if they abolished it or not, but there was a test that students had to take and pass before they got their diploma. And that wasn't the case. When I was in high school, you kind of just make sure you take your classes and get a certain GPA, and then that determines whether you graduate. But it was something about this test. So sometimes these tests we are finding are we think they're, unbiased and neutral, and they're actually not. So if eliminating the SAT will, make the playing field more level, I'm for it. But I would definitely need to, kind of understand the concepts and sort of the issue at hand a bit more. But I'm all for making sure folks have the same opportunities, despite sort of where they came from, because we all don't get the same school. I learned that even at USC. I'm thinking I was number 2 in my high school class, got to USC and was sitting in them class genuinely confused. What are they talking about? And my friend was like, "You didn't learn this in high school?" No, I did not.
Right. Yeah, and that's interesting because I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for with the SATs is that there's no racial or ethnic disparities in terms of the scores, right? Because that tells you that systematically or systemically something is wrong if a certain group of people tend to do better or worse at it. And with the SAT, I believe that the scores that you get determines kind of the quote unquote quality of school that you're able to attend.
Yeah.
And then if certain races do better or worse and they go to the quote unquote poorer colleges, that kind of perpetuates everything over again, where, you know, people of color are underrepresented in kind of academia in terms of getting tenureship with universities and stuff like that, because they didn't go to the same prestigious schools like Harvard and whatnot. So it's just a whole cycle that, like you said, we probably have to re-examine it more holistically.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have to re-examine college in general. Think about it. We're in a situation where the college campuses are closed. Well, at least most of them are. I know mine is. We will be teaching online. USC will be online. I know some other schools are thinking of different ways to do classes, but a lot of these schools are going online now. And so, you know, students are rightfully saying, hey, why am I still paying full tuition? And I'm not getting the full college experience. You know, we're talking to our teacher through a computer screen. We got to start really rethinking some things. It's really interesting time.
Yeah. And another recommendation, we won't go through all of them, but another one that's more on the, I guess, you know, from my opinion, maybe you could say it's more on the superficial side of action, where funding mandatory anti-racism workshops in universities and colleges. I'm not sure about that specifically as a solution to kind of address the institutional racism in education, primarily because we've kind of seen similar things done before with, you know, discrimination, sexism, and I'm not sure if those have had an effect. Just simply telling people how to be, you know, I don't know if tolerance is a word, because I don't want to go back to tolerance.
Right.
When I came to Canada in 2007, the kind of public discourse around, you know, race or just people that are different from quote unquote normal people was, we have to have an environment to tolerate people.
Wow.
And that's how I heard it anyway.
Right.
I'm not sure if right. And it's just to be tolerant of others. And it's just like, tolerant makes it sound like a chore.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I don't know if it makes it sound like, you know, they're not that, I mean, they're different and they're maybe not as good as you, but we just have to put up with them.
Right.
You know? So to me, when I see something like workshops, it makes me think of those things. I don't know what you think.
I think workshops are important. You kind of have to put it out there like, hey, this is what is happening. This is what we will not accept. This is where we need to move forward. So I feel like in some respect, you kind of do have to educate, or at least put that effort forward. But I think what ends up happening is, and this is not even just in higher education, what I think happens is we stop there. Oh, we did a training and we trained all the faculty and we trained all the students. And we did this thing. We called this expert in and they came and did a thing. And you something to kind of check off on your annual report thing. But it's now that everybody sort of has this basic level of understanding based on this training, now what? What does that mean moving forward? How do we operationalize that? How do we institutionalize that learning? How do we make the change? And I think the other part of training that becomes dangerous is for people like me. And actually, when I wrote my book, the main catalyst for writing my book was I was sitting in a training. And they said that the slide came up and it said blacks fare worse in every single system in society, education, housing, I had all these graphs and charts and stuff. I'm black. Right. You talking about me, you talking about my people, my neighbors. So what happens sometimes in those trainings, yes, it's wonderful to understand and learn, but what happens to the people that are in that space that are re-traumatized by the information that's being shared? How are you protecting the faculty and the staff that are part of that group that we're trying to, let's all get together and hold hands. Wait, no.
Yes. Yes.
So I think
Yes,
that's the
yes.
other part of it too. How do we protect staff that may feel a certain way by what's being shared? Because ultimately it's going to be traumatizing to them to some degree.
Right.
So there's,
And even students in the classes as well. Yeah. Because that reminds me of in our MPH program, we had a course called Indigenous Health. And we had three people that identified as Indigenous in our class. And me being a minority myself, whenever we'd have kind of some of those tough classes to learn about, colonialism and some of the acts of oppression by, the Canadian government, I would always go to them after class and be like, how do you feel just kind of learning or listening over and over that basically your people are just screwed over? I've been in those classes as a Black person, and it's kind of uncomfortable for me to sit there, for you as maybe even as a white educator, to tell me how basically historically screwed over my people have been, to hear that over and over without kind of the positives behind it about, success, not necessarily success stories, but maybe stories of resilience and, making sure that the take-home messages are clear, that people, despite all of these historical injustices, as a people, they were still able to overcome and be in the position they are now, and are still fighting for equity in society. So I think that context sometimes gets lost in the way, the whole re-traumatizing thing, as you said, for the educator and maybe the students who identify with that particular topic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll leave it on this note. So, and I guess everyone can put their 2 cents in before we conclude it. So, given everything we've talked about today, can we ever truly have these institutions of higher education that are completely free from systemic racism? You can go optimistic or pessimistic.
I am of the belief that our systems, especially in the United States, are built on racism, oppression. We all know Black people built this country, literally, like the White House, all our structures, right? And if we really want to change the structures and institutions so that they are more equitable, I'm of the thought that we have to actually in some way tear them down because the foundation is rotten.
I second that nomination.
You know as well as I do, if a house is on a messed up foundation, we can't paint the walls and put new curtains on it and say, oh, it's fine now. It's not. So I don't, and please believe me, I do not have an answer as to what it looks like to tear down a system.
I didn't expect you to. That's okay.
I'm just saying that I don't know what that looks like.
I would nominate you for president right now if you had the answer to those questions.
I don't know what that looks like, but I feel like it has to all come down. It has to.
Right.
And there's certain people in this country that don't want that to happen, will fight it to the end to maintain their level of status and power. And so that's where the problem and the struggle is. So I think higher education, our institutions of higher learning are just as a part of that, just like police, law enforcement, housing, all of it. So somebody fix it.
So yeah, it goes back. I think what you're saying and what I've heard kind of the deeper thinkers say too is the systems are working the way they were originally intended to work. Right. So it's not a matter of, oh, wow, you notice that, people of color just seem to not do well in these systems. It's like, yeah, that's how they were set up to be. Right. So it's not that it was designed to be equitable and we're realizing now that it's not. It's just, it was never designed to be equitable.
Perfect.
So it goes to that thing that you were saying about we have to dismantle and redesign something completely new to kind of not leave anybody out.
Absolutely.
I second everything Nicole said. We definitely have to dismantle the way the systems are built right now. But I just want to touch on something we didn't have time to explore, and I think it deserves its own separate discussion. But especially in Canadian context, if we talk about educational disparities between Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations, it's such a huge gap. And it's because of the history of how, especially in Canada with residential schools as well. So I think that deserves its own airtime. But
oh yeah, definitely.
I agree. I agree. That whole population has been just done so terribly wrong from the very beginning, especially in the United States. Hey, we want your land. Okay, we're taking it from you. You got to go, move.
Right.
What?
Right.
This was mine. Or even
Right.
worse, oh yeah, here's some blankets, and they got syphilis and smallpox, whatever it was that killed a whole bunch of
Right, right.
folks. It's like, they got done wrong back then, and then they
Right.
continue to be done poorly, treated poorly today. And their
And
health
then you have
outcomes
people with the
reflect.
sorry to interrupt. You have people with the audacity to
Yeah.
say to some of them, "Go back to your own country."
It's like, it's already here.
Someone didn't learn very well.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Or get mad, or they have their casinos, because here, they are allowed to own casinos. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they should have all the casinos, all of them, everything.
Right.
Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So it's really disheartening. And you're right. I think that deserves its own episode, or because it's so many layers there. A lot of what we have in the United States today is on the backs of indigenous people.
The whole discussion about, reparations versus reconciliation. And that's something, and in Canada, that's the public discourse in terms of righting the wrongs with indigenous people is around reconciliation. But I know from me as an outsider looking in on the United States, it's about reparations. And I think I did a lot of research into the differences, and it's very interesting, kind of the little nuances between the two.
Right.
And but yes, I would love to talk to you about that.
Sure.
About it a little bit more later.
Okay.
So, Nicole Vick, thank you for joining us to discuss this incredibly important topic with education, racism, and in the kind of system of social determinants of health. And I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your new book.
Thank you. So my book is called Pushing Through: Finding the Light in Every Lesson. It is currently available on Amazon in a Kindle version right now. And then the paperback version comes out September 14th. And this book is about my life, and it has all these fabulous public health themes layered all throughout the book. The whole education conversation is there. Walking onto a campus feeling like, I don't belong here, and that struggle. Right. The idea of something you just said about, hey, is this system acting the way it was designed to? And I think I literally wrote exactly what you said. Like, no, this is it's working the way it's supposed to. So you might think it's something wrong with the system. No, the system is working well. We have to dismantle it. So all of that is in the book. I talk about body positivity, my journey into that. I talk about relationships, the importance of sisterhood, since I'm a woman, sisterhood, people lifting you up in your professional life and in your personal life. So there's a lot of information there, and I'm sure that anyone in any space in their life would find something helpful in my book.
Awesome. And I think it kind of goes, not to summarize your book because I haven't had the chance to read it yet. I know there's something you've been saying a lot lately about, correct me if I'm wrong, being in a space that wasn't designed for you. Am I getting that right? And I think every time I see you post those videos, I go, wow, like I've been in those situations where it's just like, this wasn't made for me to be here. Yeah. And you kind of get that uncomfortable feeling and feeling excluded and stuff like that. So I'm excited to get a copy of your book and kind of learn more about your journey. And I'm sure I can probably identify with a few things. Identify with a few things in there.
Thank you.
So for those listening, check out the book.
Go get Nicole's book.
Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our content and would like to stay up to date, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. To learn more about our community initiatives and how you can support us, visit our website at thepublichealthinsight.com. Join the PHI community, and let's make public health viral.